I am Henry Faulkner. I am delighted to welcome our guest here today, and I'll share with you a little bit before we get started how I came to meet Michael. I was walking out of our office one day, crossing 8th Avenue. There is, we won't name it, a little juice bar across the street. And I step in, and it was very obvious to me that something was different by the looks of the people's faces around me. And what I noticed was a naked man standing there in the middle of this juice bar, sort of kind of going on incoherently. And it was one of those situations that even in New York, you're not quite ready for. And I could tell by the looks of the people around me, no one else was quite ready for this either. There was everything from shock and horror to disgust to sort of dark amusement, and mostly everyone just sort of getting out of the way of this thing that's happening. And in the midst of that, I saw one sort of serene face who was clearly not paused by what was happening, and not only that, was already on the phone, was already talking to some 911 authorities, and was doing it in a way that was kind of creating an air of calm around them and de-escalating the situation. And over the next, what seemed like a long time, but was probably 10 minutes, this naked man left the juice bar, and I and this other person followed them, and we found clothes, and this person got redressed, and eventually the authorities showed up. And in the midst of all of this, I felt like it was a much easier and less traumatic experience for me and everyone around me, because there was somebody who was very present, very calm, and very empathetic. And even without talking to this person, that was something that radiated from them. And this was somebody I wanted to get to know. So I introduced myself. I invited this person to come and meet me for lunch. And that is how I met Michael and found out about the work that he's doing in the Relationship Foundation. And not only teaching people how to have better and healthier relationships, but taking those skills and bringing them into our schools and teaching students at a time when they're really impressionable how to do this. And that's something that I wanted to amplify here at Talks at Google. So without any further ado, the Executive Director of the Relationship Foundation, Michael Jascz.
So I have a couple questions. How many of you know at least 100 people? 200, right. We all know a lot of people. Do you have a different relationship with each of those people, right? The person at the deli, your family. But if I ask you, are you in a relationship, do you look at me and say, what kind of question is that? I know 200 people. Why has the word relationship come to mean significant other? Newspapers, magazines, the internet, and of course we all want to have a partner. We want to have companionship. We want to have that sort of lasting bond with someone that we're close to. So we look at the word relationship as how can we have healthy relationships with everyone in our life, and not just our urge and impetus to be with a significant other. So about almost 10 years ago, I was doing relationship coaching, and I had been working with someone who was an administrator, a parent coordinator, in fact, at the lab school on 17th Street, just up the block. And after we had worked for a bit, he said, would you come in and speak to a group of junior boys? And I said yes, because I couldn't find the no. Some of you remember there was something you know you had to do, but you didn't know why you were doing it. And I went in, I started speaking with these boys. I was sitting down, and I could see they weren't paying attention. And somehow something happened, and I stood up, and like a drill sergeant, I said, listen up. It's a bit out of my character. However, later that day, the administrator sent an email to the principal saying he had not seen a group of boys transformed in 42 minutes in his 10 years in the school. Would I teach relationship ed as a component of health ed? How many of you had relationship ed in school? No hands up, okay. So 10 years later, I went into the school, spent the rest of the entire 2008-2009 school year there, and 10 years later, we've been in over 40 schools. We've been to colleges. We've worked with social service organizations, and we have a curriculum. If the camera could come in close. Healthy Relationships 101. And we say there's no 102 because you kind of get what's in this book and carry forward with it. We've also written a book. Some of you got the book when you came in. And this is a compilation of my experiences coaching and using very much the same approach to coaching as we use when we go in the classroom. Mostly we're working with high school students. And before each chapter, some of you who have the book, you'll notice there's a student journal entry, because one of the things we had students start to do is keep journals on how they saw relationships portrayed in society. So we have a book, we have a curriculum, we also have a guidebook. Our guidebook's being used by mental health organizations. It's being used by women's organizations, organizations that work with trafficked women to help them rebuild and restore their lives, and most recently, prison counselors. We did a workshop with prison counselors who go to Rikers Island, and we have found out that they're already starting, the prisoners are already starting to speak differently to their spouses when they have their limited time to be on the phone. So I have another question. What do you do when you want to get good at a sport? Practice? Feel free to call out the answer. How about if you want to get good at a language, foreign language? Practice. How about if you want to get good at an instrument? What do you do when you want to get good at a relationship? Practice. Who said practice? Loudly. Could you come on stage? I think you should lead the rest of the talk. Who tells us to practice relationships? So 100 years ago, or more than, about the turn of the 20th century, the life expectancy was about 47. Up until then, the life expectancy was between 30 and 40, because modern medicine is what's kept us going. And so we are actually in a new period of human evolution. Now we live twice as long as most other humans. We don't think about that. We are living twice as long as most people have ever lived. How do we cultivate, sustain, and have relationships that flourish and thrive for decades and decades and decades? Some of you may have experienced a breakup. Has anyone experienced a breakup with an intimate partner? Has anyone experienced their parents breaking up? A few hands going up. It can be difficult. So there's a lot of information now out about relationships. In fact, 20 years ago, some of you may know Professor Dan Goleman. He wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence. And then he wrote a book called Social Intelligence. And many of you may have heard of the social and emotional learning movement, which is more and more is coming into schools. And Harville Hendrix, he was here about a year ago. Was anyone here for Harville Hendrix? Harville Hendrix wrote a book called Getting the Love You Want, which someone gave to Oprah. Does everyone know who Oprah is? A little over 20 years ago, and Harville went on the show. She's named him as one of the 20 most important guests that she's ever had on her show. But Harville Hendrix is what I would call a modern master. I was fortunate enough to sit in on one of his workshops, and he can read people. He can read how people are in relationships. And I saw people that hadn't slept in the same room for 25 years, crying, holding each other, ready to do it over again. So I recommend his book, Getting the Love You Want. And I recommend that you look into other relationship authors, because it's so much a part of our life. Has anyone heard of Tony Porter? He has an organization called A Call to Men. And he has an extraordinary YouTube video, a TED Talk. It's 3 million viewers. Amazingly inspiring. And we show it in the classroom. So these people, I think, amongst many others, should be household names, given how we are challenged by relationships and learning to respect each other. And so how many of you have been in therapy? A A few hands went up. How many of you don't like raising your hands when this question is asked? Okay. Well, I went to therapy and I spoke about my parents and I blamed my father and my mother for my problems. And then one day I asked myself, well, who instructed them? My grandparents were born when the light bulb was relatively new. What did they know? It was about survival. Would we have enough food? Would we be able to keep warm at night? So there came the day when I realized my parents were doing the best they could. My father lived through the Depression. I hardly ever saw him. He had a wholesale toy business before the big toy companies came along and all the little toy stores went away. And I would say my mom was very lonely and probably depressed because my dad was never around. And so I didn't have a male mentor. I didn't have a male role model. And that affected my childhood and my outlook on life. So we're going to look at, has anyone blamed their parents for anything? I just hear smiles. And they didn't do anything wrong. Keep in mind, you may have spent time with your grandparents who shower you with love because they didn't have to deal with your growing years. But what was it like for your parents to grow up with your grandparents? And if your grandparents split up, and if your parents split up. So there's this disruption that goes on in relationships, and it affects all of us. Okay. Okay, we're going to do a quick exercise. Everyone has a handout. Empathy. There's the dictionary definition. The ability to share and understand the feelings of another. Anyone want to describe empathy? What comes to mind when you think of empathy? There's a phrase that's fairly common. Feeling others' pain. Putting yourself in somebody else's. Right. But you can't put yourself in someone else's shoes when they're going through a difficult time. So I'd like everyone to pick a partner, an A and a B. The simplest would be A would have the longest hair. And if you have the longest hair but it's up, let's do this quickly. Everyone has the empathy exercise, if you'll take a look at it. So what A is going to do, and B, A, you're going to turn to B. You're going to tell them something that annoyed or disappointed you about transportation, the subway into work, something that happened at home with your sink, something that happened at work with a computer, something simple, not something tragic, like, you know, my building blew up yesterday. There was a gas explosion. Something simple. Take a second, think about it. Everybody can think of something that's annoyed them. So B, you're going to go down the list. One after you can say, you think you had a tough time getting to work. Let me tell you about me. One-upping. Has anyone experienced one-upping? Yes. Or, maybe you should get up earlier. Has anyone experienced unrequested advice? Yes. Okay. So we're going to practice empathy blocking. Then we're going to practice what we call empathic listening. And there are books this thick on the neuroscience of empathy. But we're going to do something very simple. So A, are you ready? Turn to B, tell them something that annoyed or disappointed you. And B, you go down the list and block empathy. B, you tell A something annoyed or disappointed you, and see if you can look in their left eye, stay connected, and partner A, you will enjoy blocking empathy, as it sounds like you are enjoying this. Okay, begin. So now you're going to do what we call empathic listening. A, say the same thing to B, and B, if you can imagine, this is someone, your partner, someone, you really love them. You care about them. Someone you would like to be closer with. They're going to just say, I had a rough time getting in here. And you're going to look at them and say, I hear you. Like you really, and then say, is there more to that? Tell me more. That is our simple approach to empathy is to simply say, I mean, even when I'm on the elevator now, and someone gets in, they go, I can't believe the weather today. This is my Italian Brooklyn accent. I can't believe, I can't understand why the Mets can't win a game. And I say, I hear you. That's all I say, is I hear you. And you should see the look on people's face. So A, turn to B, tell them again something, and B is simply just going to say, I hear you. Tell me more. As best you can, sincerely, imagining that person, they may already be someone that you're close with. Okay, A, begin. Moving on. Again, and would anyone like to share anything? Now keep in mind, at the end, you may want to get the contact person of this person if they're a stranger, and they might become your empathy buddy. So you call them up and say, I got to tell you what happened. They say, tell me more. Because we all want to be received, right? How about when we were young? For some of us, we'd say to whoever it was, a grandparent, a parent, caretaker, later. And so that leaves something, a mark where are we not good enough to be heard? We all want to be received. This is our empathy exercise. And we have a chapter about it. And it starts with the empathy exercise. Okay. The ACEs. Has anyone heard of the adverse childhood experiences? Raise your hand if you've heard of the ACEs. Okay, fair number of people know about it. It's based on a study that was done by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente in San Diego in the mid-90s, where they had over 17,000 participants. And what they identified in this study was that they all, 2/3 of them had at least one ACE. Take a look at your ACEs list. There's 3 abuse, 2 neglect, 5 family challenges. Do some of you know people who have some of these ACEs? And are they struggling because of those ACEs? But they don't remember them maybe. And in modern psychology, there is a fair amount of information how people block out their trauma. And then then they realize why they've had certain diseases. What they actually found is that there were health risks to this. The CDC is calling the ACEs the nation's worst health crisis, and it's least known because we don't want to talk about our shame. Do you go to a social event and say, how many ACEs do you have? I have 3. Never saw my dad. My mom was depressed, maybe mentally ill, and I don't remember anybody holding me, saying I love you, tucking me in a bed. And there were no books in our house. And I have trouble reading. And I've recently realized this, and I've cried about it. In May of 2012, I saw an article on the internet. It said suspension days drop 85%. And there were 400,000 hits on the article. It was about a school in Washington State in a small town called Walla Walla, where the principal had gone to a talk on brain science and found out about the ACEs. This is a guy that loved people, loved kids. His name was Jim Sporleader. When he realized that his kids had ACEs, because this was an alternative school where the kids went who got thrown out, there was gangs, meth, pregnancies, bullying, other drugs. Kid would say F you to the teacher, go to the principal, and he'd say, look, Smith, I got to put you out for 5 days. But it wouldn't be like, you're a bad kid and, you're going to ruin it for everybody. Now, Smith says F you to the teacher, goes to the principal. Instead of saying, what's wrong with you? He would say, what happened to you? Well, my dad's drinking. My mom's not around. There's domestic violence. The kid would calm down. And in a 3-year period, suspension days went from 796 to 135. Graduation rates went up 5 times. What do our schools want in this country? Do we want suspension rates to drop down? Do we want truancy to go down? Do we want grades to go up? So this is what happened in his school. Somehow or another, I found his email. I said, great what you're doing there. He emailed me back, great what you're doing in New York. He flew me out there. I gave a day-long workshop for his staff. A week later, Jamie Redford came in and spent a year in the school documenting the transformation and made a film called Paper Tigers. He's actually since made a film called Resilience and has organized a whole movement about the ACEs and building resilience. So what these children experienced was resilience. And what they had for the first time in their life was a stable, caring adult. ACEs affect the brain architecture. Adrenaline and cortisol floods into the brain, into the blood system, and there is a brain that has been abused. And next to it is a healthy brain. Look at the frontal lobe in the beginning. Do we know some people that might need some caring, stable love in their life? The brain has plasticity. It can regenerate. And that's what happened in this school. The kids' brains regenerated because their teachers and their administrators, the cafeteria workers, the janitors, all agreed when they looked at that kid, they looked at a student who had disruptive brain chemistry. So they saw this. Kids who did not have a behavior problem had a brain problem. Does everybody get that? Can that be something we can bring into our schools? The toughest kids are seen by teachers who are ready, and it takes time for a teacher who's been treated poorly by students for 25 years. It might not be so easy to see this, to see that their behavior is a coping mechanism and that their behavior is out of their control. So we've all seen things in the newspaper, on the internet, about these bad kids. In April, Oprah Winfrey went on 60 Minutes and talked about trauma-informed care and said it was the most important thing she had ever discovered. She said, that boy in Parkland, we have to ask not what's wrong with him, what happened to him. Who of us was asking that question? He was in and out of foster homes. What was his brain chemistry like? And the worst case scenario, which all takes us to the floor, is when there's that kind of violence. So this is the ACEs study. I've been to 3 conferences this year with 600 participants, superintendents from whole school districts saying, we have to do it differently. How about that? The change we've been looking for, the stories we've heard about schools and the problems that are there, this is a piece of the puzzle that may help schools become safer and more productive. We have a piece that we introduced called nonviolent communication. And it's this book by Marshall Rosenberg. This book changed my life. And it's what we bring into schools. And it's a major part of what's in our curriculum. And by the way, Jim Sporleader has written a book which schools can now access, called The Trauma-Informed School. And another professor that I've met, Melissa Sadin, a very simple book, Teacher's Guide to Trauma. This is a typical page. There is so much in this book that could help teachers and help parents understand and support their children. Okay, nonviolent communication. Has anybody experienced this world? Anybody ever been judged? Judgment, blame, shame. Anybody grow up with this? A few of us, right? Okay. So we use if you look at your needs and feelings list, what is that? What is the needs and feelings list? I was taught as a boy, don't show your feelings. Be a man, man up. Tony Porter points this out in his TED Talk. So now, look at the needs list first. We know all these words. If you look in the middle row, who doesn't have a need for harmony? Raise your hand. Who doesn't have a need for peace of mind? Who has a need for order? Are there any artists in the room? our paint scattered around. Do you find artists don't have the same need for order that, well, I have? Because I have an office and I want to keep it orderly. So I have a need for order. On the right side, under connection. How many of you have a significant other? Quite a few. Affection, acceptance, appreciation, care, closeness, belonging, empathy, inclusion, love, nurturing, companionship. A need at the bottom that I realized, having grown up in the situation I have a need for warmth. But I didn't know that till I had a list of what are my needs. So let's say teachers, what needs do they have? Competence, what do you have at Google? Effectiveness, efficiency, creativity, discovery. We're not thinking these words necessarily, but they are key words for an organization to succeed. Learning. In a significant other relationship, if you communicate in the beginning about your childhood and what your needs are. So let's say you have someone that grew up in punishing silence. They were alone. They meet someone who grew up with hovering, micromanaging, and controlling family members. Anyone grow up in that situation? Nobody. Okay. So they meet and they fall in love. But I don't fall in love anymore. I rise in love. Fall. These are some of the phrases we use. I'd rather rise in love. So quickly, the person who needs inclusion says, you need space. If you look on your needs list, you'll see space. I laminate the needs and feelings list, and I carry it with me because I'm still learning. I have a lifetime of conditioning. Space. At the bottom under autonomy. And I say, or the person that needs inclusion says, I'm going to spend more time with my cousins and my friends because I know you need space. What need does that immediately meet? A few lines up, safety. Now it's safe to be around this person who needs inclusion, who wants to do everything together, and the person who needs space can say, go away. And that person doesn't feel, look at your feelings list, sad, disappointed, anxious, frustrated, worried, confused. Now that they may feel those feelings, but a bond has been created where there's an understanding about needs and feelings. So this is what we bring into the classroom, is to get students familiar with who they are as needs, feelings, people. We go from this world, this is nonviolent communication. So what do you call someone that doesn't have any needs? Dead, right? Well, okay. So we have air, water, shelter, food, dead. So needs are about life. This is about our life force, our needs. So we can live in this world, a world of people and needs and feelings. And I'll finish with two quick stories. I live in the East Village, and I was working I was going to a class in Jackson Heights, Queens. So I had 54 kids in the class. I went and bought, they didn't have money for journals. The kids keep journals. And I bought 54 journals, put them in 2 shopping bags, put it on my bike. Didn't have a city bike then, a few years ago. And I biked to the L train. Then I went on the L train to Union Square, and I took the 6 train to Grand Central. And then I took the 7 train to Jackson Heights and got off. And those of you who have been on an elevated subway, you come down part way, and there's a flat space. And as I neared the flat space, I saw someone coming up slowly. Then I saw someone with that hurried look in their face, and I thought, if they go around that person, I'm going to have to stop my tracks. And I remember thinking, don't. They did. I stopped in my tracks. First words came to mind, thoughtless, inconsiderate. I won't tell you what words would have come to my mind before I started doing this. As my foot touched the sidewalk, I said, I wonder what their needs are. Maybe they're going to see their Aunt Eva, who has an hour to live, who met their need for love, appreciation, affection, acceptance. Their strategy to meet their needs included cutting me off. But were they a bad person? Were they my judgments? And I began to imagine, maybe they saved someone's life who was drowning a month ago. Maybe they're a living saint in their neighborhood and help raise money for community services. And it was as though I experienced my neural pathways, it shifted. Neurons that fire together, wire together. There was a firing in my brain, and I went, I don't have to judge people. Does everybody see how that can happen? You're riding down the road, somebody cuts you off, right? You roll down your window and you say, that didn't meet my need for safety and stability. No, you idiot, or some other words. But maybe they saved someone's life. Maybe they're a living saint. Maybe they're rushing to pick up their child at school. The lights have gone off. And it's getting dark and their ride didn't come. Do I drive up to them, say, could you pull over, please? I need to interview you, find out why you cut me off. No, but I don't have to carry this anger and resentment. And I still get triggered. I ride my bike everywhere in the city. When cabs get too close to me, you don't want to know what I think. But I don't drive up to the stoplight because, of course, they had to stop. They didn't have to get so close to me. But I don't do this, hey, you want to kill somebody? I could use the money from the insurance. It's like, I don't know who's in the back seat. Are they rushing to a hospital? Is somebody about to give birth? Are they sending someone with medical assistance to save someone's life? So we can use our minds to imagine what's right with people, what's okay with them, and not our judgments. So I highly recommend my book. Has a chapter on nonviolent communication and a chapter on empathy, and we have journal entries before each chapter, and definitely nonviolent communication. This could change the world. And it's a major part of our curriculum. And I thank everybody for coming today and hearing about the ACEs. You'll be hearing about it a lot more. The trauma-informed school movement is exploding. And schools around the country are saying, let's be there for these kids. Because when you don't punish them and re-traumatize them, after a while, the teacher says, are you having a bad day? F you. Did you have breakfast this morning? Come on to the cafeteria. When you stop getting punished, what's the alternative? What else should I do? I'll study. And that's why at Lincoln High, graduation rates went up 5 times. And our goal is to make a contribution to the education system so that we will have more productive, safe, and successful schools, and to bring this to the parents and the teachers so we have a more harmonious society.
Thank you, Michael. Since we have a little bit of time, I have a few questions, and we're going to also open up the mics on the side. If you've got questions for Michael about the program. I think there's kind of 2 buckets. One is relationships and how we are in the world, and the other is the work of taking this curriculum and this training and bringing it into schools. I'm curious, thinking at scale, what do you think it would take for relationship training, to be en masse, a part of the common education system in the U.S.?
It's a movement. There is actually a movement that's growing. And I think through educational publications, through teacher and administrator publications, and there's principal conferences, there's teacher trainings, the subject gets brought up and explained. and teachers and parents and administrators, look at the brains, the structure of the brain. How can we contribute to the regeneration of neurons in this student's brain chemistry so that they will be successful and a contributor, and that the school will feel like they're home?
So then thinking locally on this as a parent, yes, I want this in my child's school. What do you encourage parents to do to make this happen?
Parents, first of all, have limited time. Most are working. At night, there are responsibilities in childcare. As best as possible, get to parent-teacher meetings, or at least be communicating and inquire, is there something going on around this trauma-informed school movement, trauma-sensitive school movement? We're very interested in it. We'd like to know about it. We'd like to have it considered for our school, because we've heard that it can bring about change that can make a difference.
Okay. In terms of sort of the audience here at Google and a lot of technologists and people who create tools, how do you think, what can we do to make technology foster relationships rather than be something that divides us?
I'm not sure. Technology has saved lives in many ways. I find it hard to read something that's harsh. I guess it's called trolling. It just hurts. I actually physically know who is, but I'm also thinking, who is that person? What are they going through? Instead of my judgments, what a jerk, how could they say this? It's changed the way I think. I don't like it. I feel pain. I feel sad. But technology it can bring people closer. It's a way to stay in touch with people, and just a quick note, caring, thinking about you, how's your day? Something like that can pick you up, make your day. And instead of maybe statements and judgments, what do you think about this? A lot on people's minds are politics, and because I've learned not to judge, and I still judge when I see things going on in the political world, but I'm not making that person wrong, because I don't know what their childhood was like. I don't know what their brain chemistry is like. I know their strategy to meet their need for acceptance, appreciation, a community, included a strategy to say, we like these people, but we don't like those people. So, and that, I feel sad.
This is interesting, because I think when we talk about empathy, I'm thinking about this other person and how can I think about them. But when you describe, like, try to, when you're reading trolling reviews and having some empathy for the person there, that seems like that's for me. That's something that almost seems like empathy is self-defense.
I hear you. I wouldn't say I have, that empathy comes up for me. It's more, what do I feel? My feeling, and noticing that I'm just not judging. Mary Louise is our office manager sitting here. Corinne is our intern from Dartmouth University. Have you heard me say any judgment words about anyone? Except myself, maybe, right? Because it brings the atmosphere down. I don't know what's wrong with somebody. I'm just wondering what their unmet needs are. What are our unmet needs? And I just also want to mention, while people are still here, in New York, there's an amazing organization called New York Center for Nonviolent Communication, NYC NVC. And they have monthly, the first Monday of the month, they have a buy donation, whatever you can spare, for an introduction to NVC. NYC NVC that's where I've learned most of what I know about nonviolent communication. And this word nonviolent, we don't think of ourselves as violent people. We associate it with wars and beatings and killings. But are some of the words we say hurtful? And have a lot of hurtful words between countries led to violence? Hey, your country stinks. Yeah, your country stinks too. All right, let's go to war. We can do it
I
differently.
think that's usually how it happens. Yeah.
That's how it's
All right. So one last question is that, I mean, obviously there's graduation rates and things like this, but in terms of just applying this in our relationships, how are we going to know we got this right? Like, what's the metric? What should we be looking at? There's a lot of data scientists here. We like numbers.
Okay. I only have one number for you at the moment. My friend Marissa's in the office. She's a relationship extraordinary. We've coached couples together. And one of the very first things that as couples, when we meet couples, they're blaming, shaming, right, wrong, should. We have them practice saying, tell me more. I hear you. Not defending, not criticizing back. I hear you. Tell me more. And we can see the transformation in their faces and their physiology. Is to add that to your vocabulary. It doesn't mean you won't criticize and defend, because that's been our programming for a lot of us. But simple words, I hear you. Is there more to that? Tell me more. And what are you feeling? What are you needing? Do you need affection, acceptance, appreciation? Are you feeling like you need space? Let's meet up in 20 minutes, because I had the toughest day at work. I need space. I need connection. That's the key word that I get from nonviolent communication is connection. Connection, 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 which seems to go on here, a focus on connection, because you're connecting the world. And here you have the opportunity to connect with each other.
Well, and on that note, thank you very much, Michael. Pleasure.